Hey everybody, before we get started, a word from our friends over at Virginia Theological Seminary. As the largest Episcopal seminary in the United States, VTS forms men and women for leadership in the church. They offer the traditional Masters in Divinity, Anglican Studies, and Doctor of Ministry degrees, as well as the new Master of Arts degree with a focus in theological studies, Christian formation, religion and culture, or biblical interpretation. VTS offers educational experiences in local congregations, schools, and hospitals, as well as cross-cultural immersions throughout the world. Go ahead and check them out over at vts.edu or on Facebook. Okay, here's your program. Hi everybody, I'm Chris Yaw. Welcome to ChurchNext. It's a place, as you know, where people who are passionate about building healthy congregations come to hear from seasoned mentors who are doing just that. And as we know, more than half of the visitors who come to our churches these days have totally checked us out on our website. And Keith, I think that number, I've heard any estimates up from 80 to 90%, depending on your context, because it's our church's new front door. And so with me today is a Lutheran clergyman who takes the church's foray into digital communications very, very seriously. His name is Keith Anderson. He's a Lutheran pastor, blogger, the author of a forthcoming book. I'd wave it up in front of me, Keith, if I had it yet, but it's called Click to Save, the Ministry Bible. And Keith, welcome to ChurchNext. I'm happy to have you here. And I wonder if you could tell us, if you could start off by telling us what is Click to Save?
Click to Save is a hands-on guide for people in ministry on how to use social media. And the big distinction I think that this book provides is that so much of what we get for churches when it comes to social media is just taking business marketing ideas and applying them to the church, which is really a sort of a broadcast media model. And what we want to do is really help people think through about what this social media looks like as an integrated part of their daily ministry, how it relates to their preaching, their pastoral care, forming disciples, advocating for justice. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we're trying to provide, and sort of a step-by-step guide on how you get started with these things, how you might imagine what they look like in your ministry. So I think we profile 40 to 50 different people from all denominations around the country and the way they're using it in their ministry.
Okay. Well, let's widen the conversation if we can a bit, Keith. And you know, you appear to be a young pastor. At least the hair dye's working. But I'm just teasing. But we're seeing you know, the church having to make some changes, aren't we, because of the way we communicate?
Yeah. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And I think a lot of it is that people have different expectations now about the institutions to which they belong or what they're considering belonging to. So you have to be present in the digital world. You have to have a website that can speak to people. It doesn't have to be super fancy, but it has to be authentically you, and it has to speak. And beyond that, our pastoral or ministry presence in social media is just very important. Rather than the first contact being when people hit the narthex and we're handing them a visitor packet and doing this cramming all this information in a short period of time, people now have time at home to look on the website, to see how you relate to people, to get a feel for your ministry and your congregation.
I mean, even these days, the packet that we give them is almost out of date by the time they come to the church, huh?
Yeah, we don't even give out visitor packets anymore.
Is that right?
Yeah, I'd say about 100% of the people that come to our church have already visited the website.
And have all that stuff.
Yeah. And so, on Sunday morning then, it really is freeing, because rather than trying to give them a bunch of information about our church, we can actually listen to them and hear about their journey and how they got there and what they might be looking for. So it kind of frees up that Sunday morning time before and after church.
Right. So when we talk about technology and we talk about church, certainly the website seems to be the most obvious because of what we've talked about in terms of our presence and how everybody, most everybody, I mean, not having a computer email now is kind of like not having a phone in the 70s. It's gotten to be that big of a deal. But the other aspects, though, of how we communicate digitally, how are you seeing effects as a pastor of short attention spans? Of people, do you allow people to tweet during your service? What other?
I wish they would, but we haven't gotten that far.
What other ways are you seeing the changing technologies to have an impact on your congregation?
Well, outside of what I do or the congregation does, people are just connecting to one another. Yeah. People who are members of the church or connected to the church in some way, I see relating to one another throughout the week. And I think those connections are only to the good. I mean, even the little likes and comments are ways of building stronger connections over time.
Right. Now, is your parish, is your church's website integrated well with Facebook?
Yeah, we try to point to where we're present in social media. So a few different places you'll see links to Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. We embed a YouTube video for the 2-minute Bible study we do each week on the website, and also display a list of our latest tweets on a Twitter widget. So we try to present on the website itself some of the social media we do to sort of say we're social and we don't want to just pass on this information. We want to be engaged with you.
Right. And that's really what it's about, isn't it? I mean, it's about, you mentioned earlier, meeting people, and certainly about engagement. Some people, and I've talked to some pastors who don't want anything to do with screens because they feel that people are in front of screens too much already, and that they come to church to go beyond that. What's your thinking about that?
Well, I mean, we don't have screens in our sanctuary. Yeah. We have a very traditional service, big organ, right out of, we worship right out of the hymnal, pretty much. And so we hold together in some ways the sort of, and there are other congregations that do that, a very sort of pre-digital kind of way of worshiping that's a couple millennia old, and also a way of communicating with people that's as new as Facebook and Twitter.
And are you finding that younger congregations are the ones that get into media like that, or are you finding that your folk of all ages now are being penetrated or making this penetration? Yeah,
I think certainly there are churches that cater to young adults and who are digital natives, and so it's just they do it almost without thinking, in that kind of church environment. In our own, in the last few years, I've certainly seen a progression where maybe people my age and younger were more present on Facebook. But as you may know, the largest growing section of Facebook tends to be people in their middle ages, because they want to keep up with their kids and their grandkids. Yeah. And so I've seen
and people at that age actually do know 1,000 people.
Yeah.
Whereas he's young. I mean, I remember my nieces showing me once he had 1,000 friends, and I thought, yeah, you don't even know, But when you get to be older, you've run across that many people.
Yes. Yeah.
So how is this changing? You mentioned that you're no longer printing up welcome packets, Keith. How does this change any other aspects of what you print and what you don't print?
Yeah. So we've gone mostly digital in our church communications. We still print a Sunday worship booklet and bulletin. That's very traditional.
Yeah.
But our main way of communicating now is a weekly Wednesday email that we send out, and just provides the information for the week. And we've really transitioned from sort of a monthly printed newsletter we'd send out to maybe 150 people to a weekly email that we send out. So we've managed to save on the printing and mailing, but we also provide more timely information for people.
Yeah. Now, for older congregations, that can be a big change, because for years we got the church newsletter. For years we are used to, the volunteers who come in have been stamping and stapling and bulk wrapping, etc. How do you go about making a change like that without, causing too much of a tumult?
Yeah, I think we really are in this bridge period between print and digital.
Yeah.
And so we have to be really attentive to that. So when we do a newsletter, we'll email it out or post on our website a PDF of the newsletter.
Yeah.
But we have a special list of people that don't have email or that maybe have email but have poor access.
Mm-hmm.
And so we print hard copies and we mail them off.
Mm-hmm.
For the Wednesday emails we send out, we also print those out for Sunday morning. And those become sort of the bulletin insert with the news for the week. And if anything has changed between the Wednesday it goes out and the Sunday, we make those adjustments. So we try to duplicate, when possible, that information.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And do you have more email subscribers now than you used to have newsletter subscribers?
Good question.
Because it's got to be. I mean, I would think because of the ways that, you know, the ease, it makes it much easier to just put somebody's email on there.
Yeah, I'd say probably it's at least even and maybe more email. And, you know, on the front of our website, on the front page, we have a place where you can sign up for our emails.
Yeah.
So we try to make it as easy as possible for people to follow what we're doing.
Sure, sure, sure. So now let's get back to your book. It's coming up soon. You co-wrote it with a mutual friend of ours, Elizabeth Drescher, and give me the outline of how the book unfolds.
Sure. The book sort of unfolds actually within the story of how the book came to be.
Okay.
Because Elizabeth and I actually only met in person once the book was almost done. Mm-hmm. We had connected.
So this was a real digital relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd come across a couple articles she'd written for Religion Dispatches on social media and church at a time when I was, you know, at that point asked to give my first presentation on what our congregation was doing. And I think I emailed her afterwards and said these were really helpful. I, you know, shared some of them, and they, you know, were well received. And then we sort of struck up a relationship from there, email and Facebook, and, you know, discovered that we had a similar viewpoint when it came to church and technology and social media. And so that developed over time, and eventually she wanted to create a follow-up book to her book that came out last year, Tweet If You Heart Jesus. Yeah. Which is sort of more of a kind of a conceptual look at church technology and social media. And so she knew I was practicing these things in the parish and invited me to write along with her on it. And so the story of the book is a bit of what we're trying to get at in terms of the way digital connections can become incarnational connections. We can develop these relationships that become meaningful and do, you know, meaningful work on behalf of the church.
What do you mean by digital relationships can become incarnational relationships?
Connections like ours that just start with reading someone's blog post, or maybe just friending one another on Facebook because what they're doing seems to be of interest.
Right.
You know, can evolve over time into a real relationship. You know, I think a lot of the fear in social media is that the digital will replace the face-to-face.
Right.
And in my own personal experience, that hasn't been the case at all. The digital has actually drawn me closer to people. Yeah. And help build relationships.
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, I don't know if the makers of Match.com ever thought that people would never meet in person. But right. That, you know, the whole idea is to hopefully spur something of more substance than one might experience digitally.
Right, and people who seek community and relationships seek it in many ways. You know, that people who are involved in social networking actually tend to be a little more involved in their communities and religious communities.
Say that one more time, because our thing just kind of our connection kind of timed out in a second. Say that again.
You know, the Pew Internet and American Life Studies tell us that people who seek community do it in many ways. So social media is one part of that. And in fact, people who are engaged in social media tend to be a little more active in their communities, a little more volunteerism, and even more active in their religious communities.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh. Because you certainly the Flat Earth Society would suspect differently. You know that if you're really just a dweeb because you're getting involved digitally because you really, you know, have poor social skills. But you're saying that's the opposite.
Yeah, well, that's what some of the research shows. Okay. In my own personal experience, that holds true.
Okay. Okay. So if you're more active in social media, chances are you're probably more social
person. Yeah.
So you're a more social person, which makes a lot of sense. So the ability to use blogs, to use websites, to use social media to build community seems in many ways analogous to what the church is about, because aren't we about building community?
Right. Yeah. And that's, I think, the most sort of obvious connection to be drawn when you're just able to, post something or share something with a lot of people at one time and have them engage with you on it. And it's just not the community within our church, but one of my favorite things is when I post something on Facebook and I'll get parishioners and colleagues and community people and old friends I know that aren't church people all commenting together. And learning from one another, interacting with one another. So the magic for me is when all these social areas in our lives can come together in some way.
Right. Do you, let's see, so you have a lot of the visitors that come to your church have checked you out on your website. Do they, do they ask fewer questions then? I mean, they're that well informed?
On a Sunday morning when they visit, yes, and I think our style is to try to more engage, where they are, where we are. But when I go to visit people, a lot of the sort of the detail-y kind of informational things, they've seen, and that's really less of what they're interested in. And it tends to be more of the, the character of the community and sort of our shared life together.
Okay. Well, then why don't you, I mean, I know you speak often, Keith. You were just speaking at your synod, you mentioned to me. And people probably frequently ask you some of the basics of what should a church website look like? What are some broad brush characteristics that people want to go for when they design their parish websites?
They don't have to be professionally designed. That can be expensive. They don't have to have all the bells and whistles. I think it has to be clean. It has to look, sort of current. And so I think you could have a simple website that communicates well for people and that people want to spend some time on. I tend to think that people read websites or web pages 3 times. They look at it first and say, do I want to spend any time here? Is it a pleasing environment to look at? They read it a second time for sort of the big headings and the pictures. And then if that looks interesting, then they'll actually spend the time and read the things in 12-point font.
Okay.
So you want to sort of have a sense of how people are consuming your content. I think we in church can be really wordy, and oftentimes we put way too much information on a page or on a site that we need to. People have way too much information to consume, even on a daily basis. So I think you have to keep it short and in real language and to the point. And in cases where you want to provide more information, provide a link where people can go if they really want to get into it, more. Video and pictures are really important to have now. It used to be that the web was fairly text-driven. Now it's very graphical. So I think we need to reflect that on our websites. It doesn't have to be always content that you've created. If there's a YouTube video that you think is meaningful and speaks to to your community's life in some way, a theme for a season, or something you aspire to, you can include those things too.
Right. And you do something personally at your site, at your parish, don't you? You have a 2-minute devotional that you post every week. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's we call it the 2-minute Bible study, and we do it each week on the upcoming lectionary readings. And that's also been an evolution from speaking right up into my webcam to getting a little more sophisticated with it, just enough so that it is something people will bother to look at for a couple minutes. But that's probably been the most successful thing that we've done.
Is that right? The 2-minute Bible study?
Yeah, because it's video, which I think people like. And I think it's for our congregation rooted in the lectionary and the liturgical year. So it's pretty authentic to us, and for people beyond the congregation, 2 minutes of sort of a spiritual message. People can take that time and take something away from it, and it's improved the way that I talk about faith, and I think the way I preach. because I'm tending to do more and more with that audience in mind. So both the people in the congregation, but also the people beyond.
And then do you memorize then a 2-minute script then before you do it?
I don't memorize. I have sort of maybe a 3-part kind of structure of where I think I want to go from here to there to there. And some weeks it's pretty well formed, and some weeks it's not, and we just have to do a few takes till I figure it out.
Now, do you shoot and edit these things yourself, or?
No, there's a member of our church who has some background in both in theater and in doing some video. So her name's Katie, and she's been a big help in thinking about framing and lighting and audio, and some of those details that have made it a much better product.
Okay, and I would venture that because of Katie's presence, it's really made a huge impact on what the final product looks like. Yeah,
we didn't have editing. We didn't have we didn't have the Bible text up here on the screen, which it does now.
Yep.
Didn't have music leading in and music leading out. But I think probably the biggest impact is for someone to say, just be human and just tell the story. Just speak to me like a person and not like you're in the pulpit. And I noticed that in myself. I start talking about God, and I lapsed into this very pastorally professional
right. The
way of talking.
Mm-hmm.
And she really calls me to speak more just as a person.
Authentically, yeah. So that the process of communicating in a different way has in fact changed you.
It has, absolutely. And I think that sort of holds true for social media in general too. It's taught me a lot about engaging with culture, learning from colleagues, and even building and nurturing relationships over time.
Well, yeah, I mean, you tend to, I mean, as as people who certainly, somebody who's given their life to the ministry of the gospel and to following God and to listening to God in every way that God might speak, that includes through your videographer and through the various ways that you are expressing yourself in this way.
Yeah, that's right.
Mm-hmm. So when you talk to other church leaders about incorporating these kinds of things and into their web presence, what you mentioned first was keep it clean and keep it current. That's not real expensive.
No, and I think you could go to WordPress.com and put together a free blog, format in a couple of minutes, and essentially, the way that software is developed, you could create a very functional blog page.
Mm-hmm.
Not a blog page, a website,
right?
In a pretty short period of time, and because it's clean and it's well supported by WordPress, you could have a pretty good site there. And I know that there are churches that do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
For me, I like to dabble in web design, and so I try to do a little bit more, and every few years try to work up something new.
Right.
But that's really only because sort of I have a particular interest in it.
Right.
I don't think anybody has to kind of go that far, spend that much time to have a good site.
Yeah. No, and that becomes, I think, when you and I look at the parishes, the churches that do not have websites at the moment, or ones that aren't particularly helpful, those gifts perhaps aren't abundant in that particular church. What do we do in that case?
Yeah, I mean, that is a common question I get. Either there's no one obvious in a congregation to do it, or at one time when it was much more technical to put a website together, you have somebody that started one to the best of their ability,
right? And
it's really sort of plateaued, and you're not sure how to update it anymore,
right?
In that case, my feeling is that pastors and ministry leaders need to have a basic knowledge about websites, because it is the first face of your congregation. So you are, in some ways, literally the keeper of the community life, of the soul of the place. You keep that, you carry it, you live, you breathe it. So you want to be somebody that's involved with that,
right?
In the message and the look of it. But I also think there's value to understanding kind of how they're put together. And I do think that if there was nobody in your congregation at all that could do it, and you had no money to throw at it, that I think it's not a bad use of a pastor's time to think about in a very small scale, how you could put something together for your church. I think it's just that important today.
Yeah, that this becomes, as you said, the learning curve has gone down on it.
Yes.
You don't have to have a degree in this to do it, but it becomes part of what preachers are called to do, which is proclaim the gospel.
Right. And reach out beyond the congregation and welcome people into the congregation. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really a vitally important part of being,
because there are a whole lot of people watching.
Yes, yeah, I think you'd be surprised how many people are checking you out, and in some cases passing you by if your site is not speaking. Yeah.
Now, what about URLs, Keith? What the web address, if you will, to a congregation? What's advice for choosing a correct name for how people might find you?
You want to keep it short and sweet, and ours is redeemerwoburn.org. So just no acronyms, no initials that look strange together. Okay. Try to keep whole words, whether it's the name of your church in the town. So I think you want to make it something that you could speak to someone and they could pick up what it is, as opposed to spelling it out for them.
Right.
That's a good litmus test. Could I speak it to you and you could probably type it in and look it up?
Okay.
Don't make it too archaic.
And so that might take out dashes or dots or underscores or something, or
maybe dashes aren't too bad. Yeah. But if you have whole words.
Right. So okay, and so we talk a little bit about websites, clean, current, to make the URL rather as simple as you can, yet identifying what you're going to. But we also talk a little bit, and we touched on it before, about Twitter and about Facebook. And is the context of your congregation going to make up your involvement with that? You've said that you've got presences on both of those outlets.
Yeah, I do think that there's a pastoral sensitivity that needs to be there in terms of your congregation. So I was talking to pastors this past week saying, nobody in my church is on Facebook. It's an older congregation. Right. So you probably don't want to spend much time there.
Right.
Because you're not serving the congregation, the people that you're called to. Mm-hmm. So I think it does depend on your context, how much you want to be involved. Mm-hmm. We have a number of people, mostly on Facebook, a couple people on Twitter, but they're not very active. Mm-hmm. So Facebook is the place I connect with parishioners. And really most people. It's the largest social network, so that's really the best place to spend your time because most people are there. Mm-hmm. Twitter's been great for me in reaching out to the local community because the YMCA, the Boys and Girls Club, community organizers, our local representatives are on there. Mm-hmm. And so that's been an important way to connect beyond the congregation.
One of the things you mentioned towards the beginning of the interview, Keith, was that you can use digital communication to further the mission of the church, especially when it comes to justice issues. You kind of mentioned that. What do you mean by that?
I think it was, as we've seen, really in the Arab Spring and other places. I think. More recently with the SOPA and HIPAA legislation, there was a big outcry in social media about it. Yeah. That social media is a great way to raise awareness of issues that are important. And, whether it's personally important to you or, congregationally important or whatever it is for your ministry context locally. So it's a great place to raise awareness. And hopefully, if you want to engage people more in being advocates and working for justice, building those relationships in social media, can lead to actual activity and work on that behalf.
Okay. So, but you can also kind of keep in touch with those locally who are involved in those issues as well.
Yes. Yeah. So, like here in town, I'm connected with an organization that their mission is to build community, to build social capital. In our town, and they're using social media actually quite a bit in that regard, and so that's a really important connection for me as somebody that lives in town, but also the congregation, the pastor of the congregation in this town.
Right.
So there are these relationships from institution to institution leader to leader.
Yeah, so it's not just really a connection with you in your community, which may or may not use different sets of media in your faith community, rather, in different ways, but it's about reaching the wider community because the wider community is now more accessible.
Right, right. We've gotten, more publicity in the last year than we did the previous 7 years of my pastorate. We've been more involved in the community in the last 6 months than the previous few years, mainly because social media allows me to cultivate those relationships with people. And when a need arises, we have an ongoing connection, and we can leverage that to do something together.
Right, right. So really, part of the church leaders, the pastors, world, if you will, becomes more accessible through your use. I mean, you don't have to travel, drive to people's offices and storefronts in order to engage with them. You're able to engage in an effective and judicious use of your time.
Yeah. Yeah, right. I mean, boy, I've accomplished a lot from my laptop, at my kitchen table. Yeah. Pretty remarkable in that way. You can make a good use of your time. And then you want to look for opportunities or create opportunities, to connect with people offline as well. Mm-hmm. So those can sort of mutually reinforce each other. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Move kind of from the news feed back, in person and then back into the news feed.
Right, right.
Create sort of a rhythm there.
Now, certainly, foundationally for a church and for a pastor is the spiritual life, is the life of prayer, the life of contemplation and meditation on the things above and not the things below. How has this digital world helped you become a more spiritual person, if you will?
Mm-hmm. I think there are probably some obvious things, that people will share scripture verses, people will share prayers, blog posts on matters of spirituality and devotionals. Mm-hmm. So I think there's just a lot of content that comes to me now easily that I really have to search out before.
Right.
So I think that is one area. But I look at Facebook, for instance, as a place where people are living out their the priesthood of all believers, their holy calling in their daily lives. Mm-hmm. And for me, spiritually, I think that really is the thing that speaks most to me, the sense of God in daily life, moment by moment, sort of contemplative spirituality, being present to what is.
Well, and I mean, what you're mentioning is, because of, say, Facebook and needs being able to arise and people being able to meet them, prayers, I don't know if we've ever had in my parish as many people on the prayer list, if you will, if it weren't for digital communications, because it's just easier for people to email.
Yes, yeah, yeah. And our prayer tree at our church is on email, and it's a 90-year-old lady that has a barely operational computer that runs that prayer tree at our church. It's a beautiful thing.
So what do you mean by prayer tree? She hears of somebody to pray for and she sends out these emails?
Well, people will email her and say, could you pray for me or pray for so-and-so?
Yeah.
And then there are those of us who have agreed to be on the prayer tree list, the email list. So she'll send that out and then we commit to pray for that person.
And she's got her MS-DOS computer working overtime. Oh gosh. So tell me about some of the challenges that you've run into, Keith, as you've had to walk this bridge, as you referred to it earlier, because this is a time of bridging between the old ways of communicating and the new ways. What are some of the challenges, and how have you been able to meet them?
Yeah, I think some of the concerns that I've heard come up either in my parish or from other pastors and theirs, I think you have to be really intentional about what are we sharing digitally and what are we sharing in analog, face to face, and the church announcements, and a lot of times social media is not something people in church really get intuitively. So I think there's some education to be done about what role this plays, in a pastor's ministry or within the congregational ministry. And we're having some of those actually discussions right now about then, what place does this have in furthering our congregational goals? How is it helping us to reach out how is it helping us to build community within. But I think being in a dialogue with people over a long period of time and not taking a lot of the details for granted about what is social media, where do you find it, what is Facebook, those kind of things. I think you've got to lay groundwork.
And what do you have, or do you recommend that churches adopt kind of a social media policy or a website policy?
I think it's probably not a bad idea, and more synods and dioceses are creating those. So taking a look at some things like that, I think, would be helpful. My reservation is that oftentimes, and this is not just as regards to social media in the church, but we can really focus so much on the terms of engagement that we never actually get to engaging with people. Right? We're setting up the boundaries and the rules and so forth, and we're actually never getting to the point of reaching people.
Right.
So I try to get people engaged first,
right,
and actually then, based on their experience, what makes sense for the congregation or what makes sense for me, in terms of how I structure my time, what I'm focused on, and who has access, who's an administrator to our website or pages and groups.
Okay. So anyway, getting back to your book, we keep kind of going off and coming back. The Digital Ministry Handbook. You're talking about websites, Twitter, Facebook. What else is in there? What other points are you making?
We talk about YouTube, and we just try to encourage people. You don't have to have a kind of completely finished product, and that's sort of the charm of YouTube videos, that they are amateur.
That's a generous word.
So we talk about YouTube, we talk about Foursquare, and
what is Foursquare?
So Foursquare is it's a sort of a geo-social network. So you can with a smartphone has a GPS chip in it. You can check into places like if you go to a church, you have the Foursquare app on your phone. You can check in at the church. You can, check in, anywhere around town, and you can also do that on Facebook in check-ins. But I think the value of that is it's one way of pulling together your digital presence and your physical presence, and so you're saying to people, I'm at the Y. I take my kids to the Y for swim class, and I check in there, so people in my town of Woburn know that I go to the Y, but I'm also engaged in our community beyond my church building.
Right.
And so it's sort of another way of telling a story. We sort of talk about all these different social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, blogs, YouTube, Foursquare, as basically different ways of telling stories. Sort of like in the Bible, we've got epistles and gospels and Psalms, and so it depends on the kind of the platform you choose depends on the story that you want to tell.
Gotcha. So you also, Keith, I mentioned it during the intro, are a blogger.
Yep.
And you recommend that to clergy, and you do speak in a number of different places. Are you surprised that more clergy are not blogging?
I'm really not surprised, because they spend so much time writing as it is. Writing sermons, newsletter articles, letters of recommendation. So it's a pretty intensive writing job as it is. I think the thing I think that I go back to is I was in a mutual ministry committee meeting. This is several months ago now, and they observed that my blogging was making me a better preacher. So my fear had been taking time to write the blog would really be taking away from my preaching on Sunday. I think that's something that you have to pay attention to. But they thought the rhythm of writing and a larger volume of writing and just getting better by practice really helped. And then I also think that writing for the web is different. People have so much to choose from. You have to get their attention. You have to keep it. You have to write with some pace and force. And I think that was coming through in my preaching, and they noticed that.
And then, how often do you post? How often do you recommend people post?
Okay, so for me, I was doing once a week until we started writing the book, and then it really fell off.
Okay.
But my goal had been to blog once a week.
Okay.
And in my blog, I sort of divided up by social media, spirituality, and church, which is probably more like church leadership.
Okay.
So I had a few different topics that I could sort of write on within the blog, and that worked pretty well. The book has put a crank in that. I've done one a month now, I think, for a few months, but I'm hoping to get back to it soon.
Part of blogging and making it regular, if you will, doesn't it also? I've found it helpful to tie into my own natural rhythm as a pastor. Of well, I'm looking at these lectionary lessons. I'm mulling over certain ideas, and so I'm just going to take a break and write what I got from here, realizing it may change come Sunday. But that way it doesn't mean I have to have something totally different to come up with. And I wonder just if it wouldn't be something for more people to engage in who are in our profession if they saw it more of a development of what they're already doing.
Right, because we think, I mean, as clergy, we tend to think anything we put out there has to be a nicely tied up, finished product.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's a sermon or a newsletter article, it's just got to be just so. And blogging is not like that. Really, blogging is the beginning of a conversation, right? So you're trying to move something forward and get people thinking and maybe get people talking. And so it's not sort of the culmination of a week's worth of work. It's sort of the jumping off point.
Yeah, and I think, and I do talk to bloggers who have a different philosophy, and that this is the one thing they get to write, and they're going to make sure that every I is dotted and every T is crossed, and I respect that. But I don't know if people who read blogs expect the bar to be that high.
Yeah, I don't think so. Really.
Yeah. And so what kind of, Keith, I'm curious, what kind of generational issues do you run into with digital technology? And how do you kind of approach those?
Yeah, I think maybe the biggest thing, the first thing that comes to mind is people are afraid of they're missing out.
Yeah.
It's something's happening over here.
Right.
And we're not a part of it.
Right.
Yeah. And just like I think we print paper newsletters for that special group in our congregation, and we reprint the Wednesday emails. Right. I think there's a certain attentiveness, that you need to provide for people who aren't plugged in, so that if you're liking and commenting on things from your parishioners during the week, think about how you're spending time with people who aren't there. Right. Maybe there's to think of a balance in some way. Whether it's a visit or a note or a call, or
because I mean that's a really important point. I think is for those of us who are more engaged in digital media to understand that those who aren't may really have some feelings of alienation and of being felt left out.
Yes, and left behind.
Yeah, I mean, as I see, especially younger folks, so into. I mean, I'm into my little cell phone screen too. But you almost see sometimes a fretting about what am I missing? I didn't get picked for the team kind of thing to make it equivalent from when I was that young. That you're missing out. Yeah,
and that not only goes for social media and church, but as it goes for other things too. I mean, you can have groups that feel, not included or disaffected, or and I think you got to be aware of those groups, and you've got to pay attention. You gotta love them.
So in Click to Save, you've got some stuff about YouTube. You've got some stuff about Foursquare, about blogging. Where do you see the digital world going? I mean, get your crystal ball out, if you will, Keith. And I mean, what's it going to be like in 5 or 10 years? How much of this stuff will we have taken for granted? Is there any kind of trend coming up that you're foreseeing is going to be a bigger part of congregational life?
Yeah. I think we're going to start taking it all for granted, because we're all going to be there, and it's going to be like breathing. I think the new cutting edge people talk a lot about is mobile, tablets and smartphones, and we're consuming more and more content and interacting more and more socially on social networks on those devices. So we're really going to be mobile and social to start with, and that's a question for the content we create and how we make it available to people.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sort of interested in what that means for worship.
Mm-hmm.
If everybody had a device and you could make the liturgy available on those devices as opposed to printing, as we do, 150 booklets every Sunday.
Right.
I'm sort of interested in seeing how that develops.
Sure. Everybody pull out your cell phone. We're starting on page 35.
Right.
What would that look like?
Yeah.
That's
and would people want it? I mean,
and would people want it? Yeah.
And it wouldn't be surprising to me at some point that there's a little backlash, not from people who are afraid of adopting, but from people who have adopted and are saturated, with all the digital.
Right.
Whether people will long for, and I think there's always that in us, that longs for the ancient, that longs for the human. And so really, I think holding those together as we get more digital and more mobile and more social, the way we hold that together with ancient traditions will be important too.
Well, with ancient, I mean, they didn't even have, you didn't have books, for the largest percentage of time Christianity is that, you went and you heard and you depended on other, other aspects of your being to absorb and to understand and to move forward with what you heard.
Yeah. A lot of this is not that different. The church adopting new technologies is not different. Being together socially, in some ways this takes us back to the Middle Ages.
Mm-hmm.
People, when they did have books, could read them together, and they were chock full of all different stories, and we're bringing our own stories to it, and there's this real kind of social experience of learning and formation.
And what must people have said? Oh my goodness, don't bring those books in here.
Books! That's right.
Talk about people feeling left out and left in. Those who could read and those who couldn't, which certainly is not a marker of intelligence either. As we know, there are many illiterate people who are very, very smart.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of pull out your crystal ball. I wanted to kind of go back to when we talk about our websites and our online presence as congregations. What do we do to let people know that we're out there? How do we get folk? How do we publicize our digital presence?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we talk about in the book is how to cultivate a ministry presence online.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot about that is just showing up, just like ministry, being demonstratively present to people by posting or commenting or liking. You don't have to spend an enormous amount of time on Facebook to demonstrate that you're there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's really one of the first important things to think about is, how am I expressing my presence? I mean, just like I show up at church and I show up in the community, I'm going to show up on Facebook too, so people, that they send me a message, like I'm going to get it. A lot of colleagues that have Facebook profiles they haven't used for 4 months, and nobody's going to bother contacting you there because they know you're not there.
Exactly.
And, these days they might not go the extra step of looking up your phone number or your email address.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you want to be available to people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, wonderful. At the end of my interviews, Keith, I always like to ask folk if there's something that they'd like to say that I haven't asked about. Perhaps you came to this interview wanting to express certain things or wanted to go someplace, or maybe I cut you off and didn't let you finish your point at one point or another. Is there anything you'd like to share that I haven't brought up that you think is important for us to know as church leaders who are moving into and living in a new space?
Yeah, I think the thing is not to be afraid of it. Most of the time when I talk to people, they're afraid of how much time it will take. They're afraid of the technology. They're afraid of having to do it all at once.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, you just got to start somewhere. And that's what I did. I mean, I didn't have a background in social media or technology. My church just thought, we really should be doing something here. This is happening. And you just start somewhere, whether it's you create a blog and maybe even keep it private and figure out what blogging looks like for you, or you blog on something else entirely, as some of my friends do, as a way to learn kind of the art of blogging. Just create an account, get on there, get some friends, and really watch and listen and see what people do, and I think your pastoral heart will come through. Yeah.
Wonderful words of wisdom from Keith Anderson, the author of the forthcoming book, Click to Save, the Digital Ministry Handbook. Thanks so much for joining me on Church Next.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.